Today, we're going to go through an episode where Jason and I talk about how he was able to scale a business from nothing up to a $5 million business and exit. There's important things that I found ultimately with scaling and growing companies, and that's not only how you go about doing it with a sense of revenue as well as profitability, the employees that you have, the systems that you create, and ultimately the intangibles that you have, which helps sell your company for a larger amount than otherwise would be based on an EBITDA multiple. But it's also the intentions that you have on exiting and how you can go about doing that and planning for the future today. Jason and I go through his experience of scaling an internet company. He also goes through experience of scaling other companies where he brought his wife in to help foster that growth and that connection. And it was great to really think nostalgically on when I was at a fiber internet company and how ultimately we've seen changes in that marketplace. Things that we don't typically think about with fiber and internet infrastructure simply because we just turn the lights on and have internet from a day-to-day basis. But these types of companies are absolutely fascinating, and there's a number of nuances with them. Jason has a similar program to our Octane program, except he exclusively focuses on tech companies in kind of the hardware space and internet space, while Octane is focused more on companies that ultimately can use technology as well as AI to scale their operations, their growth, and their reach. Definitely a exciting episode going through how he was able to scale his company. I had some great takeaways myself and also put some of my insights in that I've had from my experience of scaling, growing, and selling companies. So excited to dive in with you on this episode. Today, we're going to be with Jason Pond, who's going to tell us the stories that he's had as a business entrepreneur. If you're a business entrepreneur, you certainly know the times and the experiences where you've been challenged, potentially emotionally, maybe physically, of working those long days, and by all means, absolutely financially, as well as spiritually, of will this thing work? So we're going to go through a number of his experiences today for what he's done. And I wanted to start off with the idea of you've not just been a founder, but also co-founder and a number of different things. Like, where have you really seen some of the different skill sets that are needed for these different kind of roles with owning and operating companies? Or have you really found like the skills are all the same?
The skills really are similar, but from the aspect of founder versus co-founder. So co-founder is you've got to be willing to work with people that can make decisions also in the company. And that's a different set of skills because a lot of entrepreneurs are just hard charging. They want to go forward. They just want to make the decision and go. Maybe they're a high D on the disc profile, if anybody's familiar with that, but they're very dominant. They're very just like charge through walls and get things going with it. When you have co-founders, you've got to slow it down a little bit and have those conversations and be intentional with those conversations. Because if you end up in a situation where you're with co-founders that are not aligned, and you go into business, it's disaster at the end. Fortunately, I've always had success with finding co-founders that are along. Like my wife co-founded with me multiple times, and I've had other people that have been silent in the background where they're just like, we'll give you the money, go for it. Like we want a quarterly update. So kind of the mixture of the set, but you have to be willing to listen to people and take their ideas. Because there's a reason you wanted to co-found with them, usually whether that's financially or whether that's for some skill set that you're lacking, that something that complements each other. If you both have the exact same skill, that's usually a bad recipe.
Yeah. And there's certainly the idea of, locus of control, decision-making process. Like you said, you're potentially making similar or the same, decisions. And what does that look like from that sort of symbiotic relationship? And if you are kind of like Steve Jobs and kind of Wozniak sort of difference, yin and yang, and you kind of have your own corners, or if you do have that kind of Venn diagram overlap, right? For, your experience in the different companies you've had, like, tell us more of what those companies are. And so the idea of like maybe even the name of the company, but simply just like what was like size, revenue, number of employees, just so we can get an understanding of what that has been through kind of this battle-tested entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah. So the first company I co-founded with no equity share in the company. So it was we had a single equity owner and another lady. And that company was a small ISP internet service provider in Manhattan, Montana, right? So it was really tiny. We grew it. We were growing rapidly, but I learned a lesson inside of that where co-founding, when you have no equity share, gives you zero control, right? It's just a title. And that led into my next business, where I left that company. Actually, so I'd co-founded, but I left the company and went on to buy another one. Co-founded that one with my wife, and it was just my wife and I. And that was really good. We had a healthy relationship, continue to have a healthy relationship today, and built that one up. That was Grizzly Internet in West. We built that from doing $125K a year. We sold it when we were doing a little over $500K a year, but it's a super tiny market. The next company that we co-founded, I brought on a couple of extra partners from a VC. They were financial partners inside of it. And so we co-founded a company called Grizzly Broadband. That company, we did a multi-million-dollar acquisition to kind of kick it off. So we co-founded a shell, which became the key of it. And then we bought a company that had 16 people working in it. And that was a nuance, because my wife and I, while we were co-founders and we were in day-to-day operations, and our other founders were in just board level operations.
Yeah.
We had now acquired a company that had 16 people that some of them had been working there the entirety of the company's lifespan, which was 20 years. So there was this whole culture that we had to learn. We were the new kids on the block. And right. So the worst thing we could do was walk into that and be like, this is how it's going to be. We had to learn what the culture was and then start to adapt it and pivot it towards what fit my wife and I. We took that company from $2 million a year in annual revenue to $5 million a year in annual revenue in just 3 years in a market of 65,000 people. Like that was our total addressable market, was 65,000. These are all in that internet service provider space. And, through that journey of building, when we sold the company, we were approached, didn't intend to sell the company, but we were approached. And when we sold, we had 32 people working for us and had just a thriving culture. I actually just had lunch recently with the GM over there, and things are still cruising along. We stay in touch. We keep up every, 3 to 5 months, and things are cruising along. Culture's still healthy. There's actually people that have left and are coming back to work at the company because they've gone outside the culture, realized the grass isn't greener on the other side, and coming back in. So I feel like we really built a strong business that'll last forever.
Yeah. Describe what that company culture is like. Like what was a average Wednesday?
An average Wednesday, ironically, average Wednesday for the leadership team was to sit down and powwow with that leadership meeting every week. And then that set the tone. Most of the department meetings had happened already, but we had two levels of, we had kind of two layers. We had our leadership team, and then each team had their own individual weekly meetings so that all those issues were rising up. They would handle all the little stuff in their meetings and the super tactical stuff. And we handled more strategy and where we were going in the week. And so every Wednesday we met and we talked about the bigger issues that might be going on, cross department things between customer service and billing and sales and marketing and operations. And so we would have those conversations, and our operations team was split into infrastructure operations and the construction operations. So we had a pretty healthy team. That company's now grown even bigger, and they've narrowed that down, which is normal to kind of tier things going. So they kind of have 3 levels of leadership now, where they've got the corporate quote unquote executive level, and then they've got more of a mid manager or leadership director level type spot where they can those teams go. But those days were all about strategy and implementing what strategy we set inside of our quarterly planning sessions. And that, some people say that when you're small, $2 million a year in revenue or less, having those meetings is a waste of time. And I completely disagree. Figuring out your strategy early, once you break that $1 million a year revenue mark, doing strategic planning is critical because it really keeps you on the right track and helps keep you focused, and you can grow faster.
Why at $1 million plus? Like I'm assuming it's not like, hey, at 997, right? You're not doing it. But just like for those that are stuck in the 6-figure, specifically like the solo entrepreneur who's at maybe like 250 to 500, right? In some ways, like you previously were. How have you then seen, as you went from the 500K type business to then a multi-million-dollar business, like why at about that 1 million mark is like strategic planning just beneficial to do, essentially?
You start to actually have a team of people to work with. right? So when you're under $1 million, it's claw and grind and go. It's how do you get to that million? Because it starts to unlock doors. It starts to give you margin that you can use to hire more people. And you can start to use some of that margin also to get additional help, get coaching, get inside of mentor groups and our mastermind groups, and use those groups to help focus a little bit on strategy and not worry about having to just sit inside. Like we knew when we were in a 500K business, we kind of knew where we were going and what we were doing, but I didn't have to rely on other people to help make strategic decisions. It was really myself and my wife. So strategic planning kind of happened every night, right? We were always talking about it. Or when we went to a conference, right? That would kind of be like, oh, well, we're going to go this direction, go that direction. We didn't really have a lot of help, but it also held us back. If you want to amplify your efforts, get coaching and get into some sort of a mastermind group where you can get inside of a community that can help you hold you to what you say you want to do. You want to take your business in this direction, say direction X, right? So as for those that are just listening, if you want to take your business in direction X, have people that will help keep you on that track, because there's a reason you want to go that way, and then make the data decisions to be able to go the direction. That strategic planning and starting to really see further and further down the road until you're at $1 million, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to take the time to do it. You really should focus on just generating more revenue.
It's going to in some ways depend on the industry of sorts, right? Like if you have, some of the types of companies that you've grown, it's very much going to be, I would believe, button seat, domestic US based type workforce. For those that are maybe more in like e-com or maybe more SaaS, or really just said another way, would have international type of team members, is there, kind of a thought where like under $1 million, if you did have, some of these kind of strategic individuals, not just necessarily like VAs, right? But like if you, outsourced or even did like fractional individuals, that, you would still make those pieces, because there's definitely a change to your point on when, I as the business owner make decisions, and then when I start going from me to we. And so it's just a question of like, when is that like an inflection point of that sort of like mindset shift? Like said another way, could you hack it with getting, offshore sort of talent or reduced talent or like fractional talent? Or is it really truly only beneficial when you have like full-time button seat where, maybe next to each other sort of thing?
I find there's great passion and great energy when you're working in the same, in the same office, for example, versus trying to do remote. But I see how remote works, and I've done both in the sense from a strategic standpoint and a leadership standpoint. When you're sub $1 million in annual revenue, unless you have a super high, like an 80-90% profit margin, there's not a real, if you're dealing with 30% profit margins, if that's $300,000 a year, you don't have a lot of extra you can do with that money. Where if you're in a super high profit margin, maybe you're in a SaaS model then you're doing, 80-90%, and you can take and spend that money on strategy. And you kind of have a lot of money to be able to know what direction you want to go with. Hiring offshore or partnering with offshore talent, I think it's just a matter of finding the right people and what fits inside of the model of the business that you're trying to grow.
One thought that comes to mind, and there's a couple different companies out there, and haven't specifically worked with them, so I don't want to shout them out, but it's the idea of, hey, I can go onto this platform and find someone with the experience of like XYZ, right? Maybe they're 100 an hour or something like that, right? Like that sort of like information consulting, not necessarily consulting, and then not necessarily implementation in some ways, right? General consulting I define as just like I make a PowerPoint. No disrespect to that. Also, sometimes that's just not what is actually needed. I'm of the belief that, great, you made, some sort of PowerPoint or there's some sort of recommendation, like push the buttons in such a way that you also have that expertise, not just spend a majority of your time on PowerPoints, also just from my experience. So said another way, like, have you found that they're all advantages, right? But I'm curious if you've found either from yourself or potentially other individuals, like, is talking to that strategic person who, you only have an hour of kind of time and advice, and they're not like in the business, you're really only giving them the information that they potentially ask and that you share, right? They're not under the hood of the car. So they're not really able to diagnose. So I'm curious at the below six figure and the above six figure, if you would kind of even recommend someone go down that path. And part of the reason why this ask is here is because, again, from my experience of going from me to we, is that there's the ego ultimately that is looking for validation on what to do when you're at the me. And so you would just only kind of tend to ask some of the questions or give the information just to have maybe a 7 or 8 figure entrepreneur or executive or what have you outside of the company almost just validate. And not everyone is going with the approach of like, hey, I'm just really curious, like, how could you help me? Like, what do you think, sort of thing? And again, it's more this sort of validation piece. So curious, again, if there's any, gotchas or other things with kind of this outsider, hey, I'm only giving you so much information, but you're not actually under the hood of the car.
The way that, so the way that I grew the first company that I own, I had an equity share in, right? Mm-hmm. Was I took a lot of time in the industry and I took focus specifically on industry conferences. I was trying to grow myself, right? Trying to grow into my knowledge base, technical knowledge base, understand what people are doing in the industry and learning from what others are doing that are bigger than I am, right? So if you're dealing with consultants or you're dealing with strategic partners potentially outside, you have to, this is the caveat is that era, it was easy to go to an industry conference, gain information of what others were doing and say, I'm going to try that, or can I tweak it and will it work for where I'm at and be open to it? Where I'm at today, building another new thing is watching out. The caveat is you have to watch out for people just trying to sell you a bill of goods, we'll call it, right? It's not that they're bad actors. It's that they're just trying to do the same thing you're trying to do, which is build a business. And so they're going to sell you their product thinking that it's going to solve your problems when it's actually not. It's just another sale. It's just another thing. It's another distraction for you to have to worry about. And I've been down that road many times in the last 12 months, trying to figure out what is actually a strategic move and then getting involved with others in the industry I'm focused in to make sure that it's going in the right direction. And so I think that, that answers the question around like, when you're small, stay inside your industry and find those that are just further ahead of you, or maybe you're at 500,000 and you find somebody that's doing 1.5 or 2 million. What steps did they take to go from 500 to 2 million? Because it's still probably pretty fresh in their head, and learn from them without having to pay them. Like do that at an industry conference where you're, shop talking at the hotel bar, right? That's one of the best places to garner information. It doesn't cost you anything but the conference trip. You come back. Now it's just about self-accountability and moving the needle forward.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And that's such an interesting thought on if they're, selling the bag of goods, because it can kind of be this, hey, do this. And then when you do that, like report to, bring it back to me. And then, we continue on it. It almost reminds me of like therapy, and by no means not in a bad way, right? But it's the idea of like, oh, and just keep coming back to me. And sometimes you can just keep within that, kind of phase in place. And you then are kind of like reliant on someone. But the idea of like being a go-giver and actually just, helping and supporting, whether they come back or not, like isn't part of, the aspect. And so, integrity and just kind of values and things like that comes to mind for me, where it's beyond just the services that may offer and the things that they know. It's that they are truly aiming to help. And part of helping is also letting go. And that's also, another thing I've seen as individuals go from kind of that 2 to 5, and especially, into that early 8 figure, is letting go to say, hey, I own this business, but I should no longer be the CEO or the individual making the driving decisions, even if I do have a team around me, simply because I'm not the individual to take it from, 5 to 50, right? Or whatever those kind of numbers might be, but really just recognizing what your strengths are. Also what lifestyle you want to live, right? Because that happens within business, where you just tend to be, again, kind of this battle tested entrepreneur that's just, killing what then becomes like your, trove of the business, and actually enjoying this thing called life. But yeah, it's a trust but verify, right? Smart Trust is a good book on some of those pieces. But it takes kind of that skills experience. And like you said, all these different kind of small things really do work together of, at the bar, at the conference, stuff that then just come to be your own, MBA, if you will, of how it's kind of growing and facilitating. Now, as you've grown these companies, you've then eventually sold them. So talk to us more about what that was like did you know how to structure the companies in such a way that it was attractive to be sold? Not necessarily that we need to go down like what the selling process was like, but I'm more focused on like the meat and potatoes kind of like intricacies, right? Because any other show could say, hey, you sold it. Well, great, amazing. But like, let's go kind of more into the depths of it.
So yes and no, right? Okay. So that to answer the question, like, did I structure it right? The first one? No. The second one? Absolutely. Like lessons learned, right? So the first company, the sale, there was no real exit strategy, but like from day one, we bought it in 2005 and we just grinded out and we're going forward. We're continuing to build, continuing to gain customers. We had various elements of the business get overbuilt. We were highly leveraged. And we got into a situation where I wanted to go bigger, but we were landlocked. We were in this area that was like, okay, how do we get out of here? And that opportunity came when in meeting people at conferences, networking events. And we ran into a group that were like, we want to get into what you're doing. I had taken the time to literally physically learn how to build fiber to the home, like run the construction equipment, and had done that. And they wanted a team. They wanted a person really that could do that. And so they said, well, would you be willing to sell to us and then come work for us? And so I went down that road and said, yeah, I think that it opens up opportunities. It expands what we can do. We can maybe get out of this area and continue to build bigger, faster, and go. And was everything structured right? Not like, do we get the best multiple? We got an ish multiple, I'll call it, right? It was okay. When we bought the second company, when we started and we got into, and we found, my wife and I founded with our other partners, Grizzly Broadband. When we got into that company, the entire premise of setting up that was to build a company that we didn't have to sell, but we could sell.
Yeah.
So we said the only debt we were taking on was the debt of the acquisition. There was no other debt involved with the company. So we didn't have to worry about being highly leveraged. We didn't have to worry about a whole bunch of payouts. And it built in a very quick, very, very rapid amount of equity inside the company. And then number two was we structured it so that we were structuring it and building it so that we didn't have to work in the day-to-day operations down the road. We still worked in day-to-day operations, but when I sold, my wife had actually stepped off of the leadership team and was focused on being half stay-at-home mom and half controller because COVID had happened and we ended up having to homeschool our kids because of it. So there was a choice that we made, but for various reasons we won't go into today. But the aspect of it was we didn't intend to sell the company, but when somebody came to us and said, we're interested in buying you, we were able to say, okay, here. And we got a really good multiple. Was it super top dollar? I wouldn't say it was necessarily the absolute most had we gone at somebody that was aggressive, but we had a very desirable buyer. They wanted to buy us. They came out of the blue and said, hey, we want, we love what you're doing. And that was the intention to build. And I think you can build a company like that. Every company, in my opinion, should be built in that manner in which it's you don't have to work in it at a certain point. You can just be the owner or you can exit by selling it because somebody says, oh, it's a desirable company and it gets you the best multiple because it's not reliant on the owner to be in day-to-day operations.
Yeah, certainly. What would you say from your experience of these different companies that you've grown, bought, sold is like the one key takeaway in terms of perspective of like the entrepreneurial journey? And I say this because at least for a lot of individuals I've known or coached or even been around or even just myself and maybe even former self as well is this idea of I'm going to have a business, it's going to be great. And then I have, net profit and seller discretion's earnings. And then I just take that and then I take the multiple that I, read about on Google, and it's 4. So 4x times this means that I could sell it for that, right? Like that sort of level of transparently ignorance, right? And there's a lot of factors that really go into buying a business and selling a business. It's not like a house. Like you buy a house and it may not have the best pipes, but you buy a business and you do due diligence on the pipes and then, invest accordingly, right? Is there just like a, like a mantra, a mindset, a like one big lesson, just like something that almost like summarizes like what your experience, advice, or tactics would be of just entrepreneurship, either buying, selling, or just existing, that comes to mind?
The basis is entrepreneurship is hard no matter how you look at it. Now, what I mean by that is when you go to buying a company is exciting, especially if you've never done it before, right?
For sure. Especially if you're leaving your job, you're like, it's the most amazing thing ever.
And you're like, oh, and you have all of these dreams. It's going to work out. And I will tell you, reality will hit you in the face faster than anything else. Because I use this term is you're going to get slapped in the face with the business. And you're going to realize soon that it's not quite what you planned on, because you most likely left a 40-hour a week, maybe it's a 60-hour a week job, for a 24/7, 365 job.
Yeah.
And there's no turning it off once you jump into it. And if you're not ready for that level of commitment in the early days of building it up and getting it going, and you're not willing to ask for help, it makes the road very, very hard. It's like climbing the last leg of Everest at that point. Like you need support, you need oxygen, and that oxygen comes in the help of usually through others and being willing to listen. Like that's the thing about it is my first one, I was all ego. I can do this. I'll figure it out. I'm just going to grind it out. We were young. We didn't have any kids. We started our family during that time frame, but it took a bit to get things really on solid ground. And my wife had to work a full-time job to keep up, help us stay alive and stay working. It wasn't until later in the business that we worked fully together. The second one was a whole different ballgame. We kind of knew what we were doing, or had an idea of what we were doing. And now we were able to dive in and say, this is the way. And I knew I need to ask for help, and I need to get in groups with people that are ahead of me doing things and understand what got them to where they're at, so I can figure out if that's a good road for us or how I can tweak that road to make it work the best for us.
Yeah, absolutely. Would absolutely agree, especially the idea of asking for help. And just like you mentioned, I'll put, in the description kind of where to contact you with your website and more information about you. But thanks for coming on and sharing more about your experience of growing, buying, selling companies. It's been great for me to reflect on, but then also just good tidbits of advice as well.
I appreciate being on the podcast, Paul.